What's up, cycling fans? We're back with another episode of Pack Chatter. We got an awesome show coming at you today. Really cool guest. Can't wait to get you into that. Before we start, we got a few things we want to tell you about. First, the New York State Bicycle Racing Association, or NYSBRA. Go to NYSBRA.com for all kinds of great information about racing in New York State, grants, event permits, next year's schedule with all the races that are permitted. Next year's state championships will be up in the next month or so. So go to NYSBRA.com and check out what's going on. Also, Legacy Bikes, that's Legacy with an I, Legaci, bikes.com. You're looking for that perfect Christmas present for your little one. That's it. Get them a bike and get them a real bike. Don't go to Walmart. Don't get training wheels. Go to legacybikes.com. Hit up Todd and he will hook you up with the right bike to get your little one started. I have one at home for my daughter. She's a year and a half. It's in the box, and we're going to wrap that up, and that's going to be her Christmas present. We're really excited for that. So make sure you get yours too. We're also brought to you by the Dirty Bikes Gravel Series. Yes, Dirty Bikes. It's going to be awesome. We have 3 phenomenal races lined up for you. Big name pros coming in, big parties, tons of prizes, great courses, hard challenges. It's where you want to start your 2019 season, is with the Dirty Bikes Gravel Series. You can see it on bikereg.com, or you can go to ridelcc.com and see some information there. If you get registered before the first of the year, you'll save a few bucks on the early reg discount. So get in there quick and set your spring goals with the Dirty Bikes Gravel Series. We also have something I can't give you all the details on yet, but I'm really excited for and been working on the last couple days. Cross Nationals is coming up on December 16th. And we're looking, Pack Chatter and Gnarly Monkey are looking at teaming up and throwing a little bar party to watch the races. We're going to watch the elite men and the elite women race. We're going to do a podcast live, and we're going to have some special guests coming in. It's going to be a really cool time. It's going to be a lot of fun to kind of hang out and enjoy racing with other people who enjoy racing. We're going to release the times and dates, and the date's the 16th, but we're going to release the times and the location here pretty quickly. We're just finalizing a few details. So keep your eyes out for that. We'll put that out through Facebook, or check my Instagram, Twitter, and we'll be giving you the details on that party. But come out and join us and just have a fun afternoon of bike racing and with other people who love bike racing. All right, so let's get you to our guest. Our guest today is from Ironman. He is a regional director out of Colorado. His name is Dan Christen. Extremely interesting guy, really understands the ins and outs of racing and the demographics of racing. I learned a lot, and I really could talk to him forever on a lot of these different topics. Talked about the growth of Ironman and where it's moving to, some off-road stuff, mountain bike racing, potentially into some gravel events. So they are really the best at putting on events in the world. They're the biggest. They really do it better than anybody else, and there was a lot of good stuff to learn there. So check out the episode. I hope you enjoy it. Here's Dan Christen from Ironman.
This isn't a road race. This isn't a mountain bike race. This is definitely something that's in the middle of both of those, and it attracts a certain type of person, and I fit that mold. So
with my co-host, the sensei of Sprint, Todd Shesky.
Dude, I'm still figuring this out.
It's like, if it's too surface of a conversation, sometimes for me it's I don't know, mentally I'm just not as invested.
When John Boy and I used to talk to each other on the phone after races, we'd call each other driving home, and we would talk about the race longer than the race was.
You'll never go out on a training ride and dig that deep.
All right, welcome to another edition of Pack Chatter. I'm Tony, and with me back from Chile to Chile, Western New York, is Todd Shesky. What's up, buddy?
Ain't not too much, just trying to acclimatize a little bit to all the snow after being in spring, summer weather for a period of time there. But it was fantastic to be gone, and but also kind of good to be back in some ways, but minus the snow. So here we are, man. So it's good to be back.
Awesome. Well, we got a great guest again today from Ironman. He's a regional director out of Colorado. Is Dave Christen. How you doing, Dave?
Doing well, guys. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Can you give us a little bit about your background with Ironman and what you do there, and then maybe we can roll into some event organization questions and concepts that we were wondering about.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been with the organization 2 acquisitions ago, is the way I like to describe it. So We've been acquired as we grew a couple of different times. And it's been a little bit over 10 years I've been doing work with this group. I've produced, I'm one of the nerds in the industry that keeps track of how many events I've been a part of. I've actually been a part of 165 Ironmans this year, or not this year total, up until this point. So I've seen our brand go from when it was just 5 or 6 of us putting on 5 or 6 events in the country to, now we've got north of 50 events in North America alone, and then over 250 events in the world that we operate. So much like we were just talking about being in Chile, I'm actually heading down to Colombia on Thursday for a 70.3 that we have in Cartagena. So we do work all over the place. My specific role is I focus on the Colorado to basically San Fran all the way up to Whistler, BC. It's kind of the region that I manage, and keep track of our brand, both in the rock and roll marathon series as well as our Ironman brand. And then we also have obviously been diving into a lot of mixed surface and mountain bike space as well recently, which we're just starting to bring into North America now.
Well, that's an interesting thought that I didn't know that Ironman was in as mixed surface and diving kind of in some ways kind of getting into the whole gravel type scene, if I'm not mistaken, then, right?
Yeah, we're exploring those things next. So as it gets harder, and this is kind of the topic of this podcast, I'm sure, or at least this specific episode, is it's getting harder and harder to permit events on concrete, on asphalt. So it's natural to see both the industry as well as the event production industry gravitating towards mixed surface stuff. So as of now, we don't have anything in North America that's mixed surface. It's certainly a hot topic for us, and we're exploring that market and seeing where we want to dive into. Mountain biking specifically is we're very keen to that right now, and that's certainly our next big move.
Will those events have like a multi-sport aspect to it? Are you looking at including the running and the swimming, or are you just focusing on biking?
Just biking. Yep. So we're certainly known as a brand, the Ironman brand, as a multi-sport brand. But as a company, as I mentioned, we're already one of the largest marathon production companies in the world just by acquiring the Rock and Roll Marathon series. So that we also have the Singapore Marathon. We have a bunch of other marathons, I believe Auckland as well, that we have in our in our portfolio as well. And that really kind of makes us not just a triathlon company anymore. The Cape Epic, which is the most sought after mountain bike stage race in the world. The Pioneer Race, which is currently going on right now in the Oceania region, which is another big stage race on the mountain bike scene. So what used to be just a multi-sport brand is certainly more now. And then what we call our mountain biking stuff is the Epic series. And that's kind of the brand that we use to refer to our mountain bike stuff.
Where do you see it from a participation level, though, as far as, the people signing up for Ironmans? Is that still strong? Has it seen a decline? Have you seen shifts in that? And how is it, obviously it's, you have these other disciplines now. So, but where do you see the Ironman traditionally as far as the road aspect go? And how is it from a participation standpoint?
I would say healthy is the descriptor we have. So as a sport, the number of participants doing triathlons is fairly flat. You'll have multiple governing bodies. We kind of consider USA Triathlon in North America to be the resource in terms of results to see exactly how many people are racing in the country still, and they're showing that our current participation rate is fairly flat. Some other groups that do the research will show varied, whether it be a slight decline or a slight incline. I think it all works out to be somewhat flat in that category. So in terms of the multi-sport brand, we see a very healthy sport right now. We see a very healthy participation rate. There's certainly from a business standpoint, we'd love to see some more people do these races in certain markets. But much like Ironman Florida this year, that was devastated by the hurricane, and we had to relocate it. Sometimes it's not necessarily people not participating in triathlon. Sometimes they're just choosing to race elsewhere because they're not sure if a market is the right fit for them in the next year, or they're going to try a different a part of the country or a different part of the world to race. Sure. And they're shifting their registrations from one spot to another.
Sure. Paralleling that over to USA Cycling. Now, you guys are obviously not USA Triathlons, so you guys don't have membership that you're looking at. You're looking only at participation level, and you're saying that seems to be relatively flat. But as far as we'd have to talk with USA Triathlon to know like what's their membership like, and how does that relate to USA Cycling, where USA Cycling as an organization has been bleeding for the last few years, year over year. And I think last year was the first year that membership took an uptick finally.
Yep.
After about 4 or 5 years of declines, pretty significant declines, in fact. But seeing it kind of level out and finally start to kind of turn the corner. So maybe we've kind of hit the bottom on that. But so I don't know where USA Triathlon fits in with membership, but you guys are seeing participation being flat.
Triathlon many years ago, and got to know a lot of the USA Cycling group very well. We work a lot hand in hand because the customer is very similar. It's very affluent, it's very educated, and it's a very similar driven customer and member. So we used to spend a lot of time with cycling, and we saw a lot of the same trends. Triathlon certainly slowed down at the same time USA Cycling started to decline. So as we start to uptick, it doesn't surprise me that USA Cycling is also starting to uptick a little bit.
Right, and arguably they're doing the same things. I mean, and Tony's been involved with, kind of the arguably maybe more so in the gravel than the road part of it, as far as event creation, and they're embracing that, and they're embracing the Grand Fondos, and I think we see there's shifts that are going on in the road scene, and we talked about that a little bit with Dieter Drake a week or so ago. And just how that's transforming. It's interesting to see that transforming in triathlon as well, though, which in some ways I guess kind of surprises me. But again, like I think you make a great point there. Is it's a very parallel demographic of people that are into triathlon and people on the road cycling, and looking for those other disciplines or avenues to participate. One of the things with USA Cycling that I see is participation race days that they track. And that's why I'm kind of interested in when you talk about the participation rate, is that the race days are down. So my membership stabilized finally. They're doing some initiatives to bring more members in, keep members, give different options there. But seeing the number of rider race days go down is something that's interesting, maybe generationally, maybe demographic wise. And I have done the parsing of that. Do you see any of that kind of like, okay, we're kind of flat on how many people are doing triathlons or how many events? Our events don't seem to be, they're not going through exponential growth. They're flat right now. And is it an increasing demographic? Like, hey, the 30 to 40s used to be big. Now the 40 to 50s, like, oh, it's the same people. Yep. They're all getting older.
Yeah, we see very similar trends. And as we look at the millennial generation, which is kind of what we're hinting at here, it's a very distracted generation. So the attention span is much shorter. So in order to be a very good cyclist or to be a very good triathlete, you got to put that work in. So whether or not they're putting that time in to get that job done, but more importantly, when you talk about the event side of things, we study this heavily outside of even multi-sport and outside of endurance sports in general. The events that are doing very, very well are the quick hitting events that are a very fast experience, a very short period of time, a low investment, not just financially, but intellectually and time-wise, for somebody to get it out, get the experience, and get on and get going. So to race, 100 miles versus, just going in and experiencing something, let's just say a festival in comparison, I know they're not the same thing. It's a much lower investment in terms of total time. So we're looking at that and we're saying, is the distance the problem? Is the time frame? Our sports are very expensive just by sheer equipment size. It's the cost of entry is really high. So it doesn't surprise that the number of days that somebody is racing is going down simply because of attention span. We see the same thing. Our biggest age group was 40 to 44, and now it's the next one up, right? It's the next 5 years. So we'll see that bell curve continue until we see, the millennial generation start to race our two sports again.
Right.
So what does that look like for your gravel and and mountain events, then are you curtailing that more to millennials? Are you looking at ways to reach them by making the events shorter, or by making them a lot of gravel events and even mountain bike events have a tendency to kind of be less focused on the competition and more focused on just the completion and the party? But then there's others that do kind of keep that competitive edge. Triathlons have always kind of had a nice balance of both. I think you got people that are really concerned with the racing end of it, and people concerned with the finishing and the accomplishment of it. How does that fit into your gravel and your off-road stuff?
It'd be hard for me to speculate in terms of the so we're so new into exploring both of those items. I can speak to the mountain bike stuff easier than I can the mixed surface stuff, because we're still just dabbling there. We haven't launched anything, so we really don't know kind of where that one will land. But I can't really answer that just simply because I don't know if we have a true direction there. We're still trying to figure out the trends, the ebbs and flows. I was heavily involved, apart from Ironman, I was heavily involved with the Outroute Rockies, which was the opening 6-day stage race for OC Sport, which is a company that puts on a lot of 6 and 3 day stage races in Europe and now around the world. And they opened up their North America project here in the Rockies, and I have got a really strong relationship with the state of Colorado, and I was involved with that project from its inception. And they're doing the same thing. They're looking at it and saying, this is a really tough nut to crack, because it's tough to get people to give us a foundation with 2-3 days on each end that people can kind of jump in, jump out on, or even just one day. Do you let people kind of jump in one day? And then, not to muddy the waters even further, you have to be careful on what that does to dilute your original brand. If you're trying to be all things to all people, that usually fails. We've seen that in lots of different industries, and that's what we all battle against, is you're trying to get everybody to have a good time. And sometimes you lose sight of the fact that you were trying to get one type of group or one group, a demographic, to have a good time, and you just completely forgot them.
Right. Yeah, that makes good sense. And I just had another question. That kind of brought me to your idea or your concept about the way that Ironman has grown and kind of branding that over the longer haul that you've had, and really branding it as a multi-sport company, and then you've branched into these other areas. Do you think, there has to be a huge advantage in the way that you've been able to be consistent in branding it, and the impact that you've had on triathlon in general, that I think from a cycling perspective or area we don't really have. Like, we don't have an Ironman company that's branding cycling and building this continuity of events that still might work with the national sanctioning body, but also has its own autonomy. Do you see a parallel there, or a way that cycling could jump on that, or is that something that was sort of unique with triathlon?
Well, I'm sure it was a bit lucky in some ways. Ironman was really sexy when the time came, at the right time. So for a lot of it's just kind of right place, right time. And that brand itself speaks for itself. So when you put a triathlon that was putting on like a 70.3 or a half iron distance, triathlon somewhere that isn't branded Ironman, and 600 athletes, you'll put our brand on it if we were to acquire it, and it's probably going to double in size. And I think that's partially the effect of people don't call triathlons. They usually just call triathlons no matter what the distance in Ironman.
Right.
That's a bit, we got a bit lucky on that one. I don't think that's anything that we strategically did. It just, the sport evolved around as the brand evolved. At the same time, it was kind of one and the same. In terms of whether or not I think it's possible for cyclists, for USA Cycling or another company to jump into that piece or into that same stream and gain the same benefits, that's a tough one. Are we too far down the road? Maybe.
I was going to say, I think it's one of the big keys, and it's something I talked a little bit about with Dieter last week, and something that I've kind of held as something in my belief of where cycling needs the support, and it's really that continuity of messaging. You have this continuity brand with Ironman, and I think it's a big leverage, because sponsors know what they're getting and participants know what they're getting, and cycling is just so provincial and so broken up with and competing interests that there's no consistency, and so it makes it really difficult to tie it all together together and push it forward. And I think you guys are seeing, at least, I mean, you get bigger numbers than you do in cycling. And cycling is a little different, of course, because but I think the gravel starts to kind of fill that gap of a little bit of we talked about in the spring with the gravel series. It gives people the adventure sense, and they're not really dropped from the pack and these kinds of things because they can kind of compete on a PR kind of level. Yep. And so it's more inviting that way, but it's also the continuity of message, and it's something I think cycling's going to need to do at some point, if not globally, at least nationally, because it just doesn't have the history here. We don't have 200-year-old events here. So, when you look at Europe and you're like, wow, these events have been going on. The Tour de France has been going on for a little over 100 years now. And so it is steeped in all this tradition. We don't have that here. And so without a continuity of message and without something to pull it together, I think you guys have got the model, I think, of, Ironman kind of owns that, which is an extension, but not a completely separate business entity from USA Triathlon, which is probably a big benefit to both of you.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head in a lot of ways. We're the largest customer in the triathlon space to USA Triathlon, and quite frankly, we're the largest customer to any of the NGBs anywhere in the world. And by no means are we perfect, and I hope none of this sounds at all like anything like we're pounding on our chest and we're saying, we've got it figured out, because I'll be the first to tell you, we sometimes are running around like, holy crap, like how did we get here, and how do we get above water? I kid you not, we used to put on an Ironman with 5 people, and I made Ironman when I created Ironman Boulder. The first year we flew in 75 staff members to put on the event, plus by 3,500 volunteers, and I just remember thinking like, holy crap, like how did we get here? And it's just changed. And the sport has changed. Our business model has changed. The customers' demands have changed. You hit a really important part of, I think, what might be a factor is the fragmentation of cycling is really complicated to understand. That's probably one of the barriers to entry in terms of a business jumping in and saying, hey, let's do something really fun in cycling and make it big. And I think there's opportunity there. The competing interests that you mentioned as well makes it difficult for the fragmentation of like your state governing body, as well as your the regions and the different layers and places that you can race with, and where are you a member and where are you not, and where you can score and where you can't. And that's tough, although it makes it cool too. Like the technical aspects of cycling is based on that. It's based on the fact that you have these categories and that you have these complex abilities to get up and down this metrics. It's really cool, and that's probably undersold and overcomplicated, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And kind of going back to related to what you were saying too about the business aspect of it. And I've thought a lot about this, and I don't think we ever talked about this on the show, but the notion that like I think you were hinting at is that some people are sort of uncomfortable with having cycling events be businesses, and I've had that in events, the small events we put on is like, well, what does the money go to? And you know what I mean? Like these things are, even the small events are expensive and they have big budgets, and you got to pay a lot of people to do a lot of things to make them happen. And yet there seems to be a pushback when people try to run it as a business, as opposed to just sort of a charity thing. And how'd you manage that with Ironman? And do you think moving into mountain biking or any of these other ones that you'll get pushback like that? Or do people just go, the events are good, so who cares?
Darned if you do, darned if you don't, right? So if you're strictly like a charity-based event, you're gonna win. Like you're gonna win in perception. You're gonna win in your story that you're telling, and it's a great way to produce an event. It does cost money to put that event. So the question that you might want to ask is how much money is going to whatever the cause may be, because it probably doesn't. Just knowing what it costs to put these things on, it's probably not as much as people think that's going to these charitable foundations. So darned if you don't. In our case. And for us, we just picked a side. We just said, this is what we do. We try to deliver a great experience. I'll counter that and maybe eat a little bit of my own words. What we do from our foundation side is amazing. Like we've millions and millions of dollars have gone into our communities that we're in through our foundation, the Ironman Foundation itself. And so I think there's got to be a bit of both. Sure. And you just gotta pick which side you want to be on, and you got to go for it. Because I think it's, again, you can't be all things to all people. And there's negatives that come with having it run by a business. Trust me, I'm internal, and I would say this to our CEO, Andrew. He's a great friend of mine and somebody I respect to the moon, and I'd follow to war because of the way he leads in this category. And we try to balance it out as best we can. And but you guys as riders and our triathletes expect a certain experience, and that's not going to come for free.
Yeah, I've always contended that it's one of the tough things in cycling, and I think it was even tougher. And I kind of broached into a little bit of mountain bike that I was trying to do as a development, basically to generate younger riders, and it was before cross was becoming really popular. Is different than the road community, and they were more into the whole experience of just the event, and whereas a road cycling is more about the racing and less about the, hey, we're gonna have a party afterwards. And so that may be some of the challenges that Ironman faces as you guys kind of cross that demographic, and if you're keeping them separate, then maybe that's really not a big issue at all. But as you kind of get into, I don't know how much of that still exists in mountain biking, and I haven't been promoting mountain bike events and in that scene in the last 5 years. So, all things kind of change, but that was kind of the prevailing mood, I guess, if you will, of mountain bike, and very different than road. And so trying to cross into it, and I was actually looked at as kind of like, at least I felt this way. And, if any mountain bikers listen, like, no, it wasn't that way. But I kind of felt like I was this interloper into the, like, why are you a roadie putting on mountain bike events? What do you know about mountain biking? It's like, well, actually I mountain bike back in like the late 80s, but it was kind of like they own that space kind of thing. And like, why is a roadie in here putting on a mountain bike event?
That's an interesting uphill battle. I mean, you've got these basically a turf war as to like who belongs and who doesn't belong, and whether that's healthy for the sport or not. I mean, probably not. I think that's pretty safe to say. But I think it comes down to, like, can you produce a good event? It doesn't matter for us, it doesn't matter. Like, to be honest with you, most of our staff that produce our events are not triathletes. So it's funny to hear you say that, because I think some of the best event producers in the world are those that don't even participate in their sport at all. And it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a good point too, and it's I think sometimes we get really caught up with it has to be, I started putting on road events, and I'd raced for many years, and then it's like, okay, now I'm putting on events. But I think there's some benefit to like Scott Page puts on Rochester Tri Criterium, and he's not an active racer, and he didn't race bicycles on the national scene. He did motocross and did some other things, but he came at it with a kind of a fresh perspective, and from more of a business perspective, and kind of a holistic view. And he wasn't trapped by, this is the way bike races go, and was able to make a really successful race because he kind of broke out of that. Well, we always run late, and we always do it this way, and it's like, no, we don't have to do it that way, and there's better ways to do it. And sometimes I think, like you say, you have people that don't even run triathlons, so you're not captured by, no, the run has to be like this, and it has to be a big loop, or it has to be an out and back, or it doesn't have to be anything, but we've kind of accepted norms because, well, we've participated for the last 20 years, and that's the way it's always been.
Right. Yeah. You guys are keen. You guys are super keen to some of the impacts that there's so many elements. Like, it's not one solution for cycling. And maybe cycling, quite honestly, and maybe the language we're using isn't the right language. Maybe that cycling doesn't need a solution. Maybe it's good where it's at. I don't know. I'm probably not the right person to ask, but there's so many elements, so many little bits and pieces like this that can build into one large upstream or uphill or headwind type of bike ride that just makes it hard for a company like Ironman to jump in and say, we can make this work. Outroute, OC Sport, the company that's putting that on, the parent company, that's the biggest challenge that they have, is how do you make road cycling work in a culture, like you alluded to before, that's not 200 years old in the cycling world. Like, our communities and our culture here do not embrace it. It just is. There's not a city. I live in Boulder, and I'm telling you right now, I ride hard with a lot of great people, and the only thing we ever talk about is how hard it is to ride with traffic around here. And you would think in a place like Boulder, that shouldn't be the story, right? And that just goes back. That goes exactly to your point, is that our culture's just not. Either isn't that old, or that it hasn't embraced cycling the way that Europe has.
Doing is a non-governing body. You guys are really kind of driving a lot of the bus here on
Yeah.
where triathlon is going. And by you going into mountain bike epics and multi-surface and things, you guys are more or less driving the bus for USA Triathlon, if I'm not mistaken. And that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, but they're great partners of ours. I would never want it to sound like we're at the steering wheel. We definitely work together on it because there's no Ironman distance racing without sprint and Olympic distance racing, which is a market we're not really in. So it behooves us to be partners with the shorter distance stuff. So you'll see us supporting, whether it be operationally or intellectually, you'll see us supporting a lot of the smaller races because it's good for us. It's good for the sport, But you're right. We certainly are, in essence, I really hate even saying it, but you're exactly right. We do have a large seat at the table, larger than anybody at the table with USA Triathlon in terms of the direction of the sport, which is a lot of their programming is based with us. It's partnered with us because it makes sense to.
Sure.
USA Cycling can do that. They've got to handpick the couple of companies that are out there that are large enough. As OC, I would encourage them if I was had a seat or a vote in the matter. I would encourage them to do their best to partner with OC Sport as those guys try to spend money in North America, and they're doing a great job of supporting those guys because that's a group that could change the makeup heavily because they've got the we'll just say the fortitude, whether that be financially and mentally, to be able to really make a difference in that category. Saturation is a big thing we haven't talked about here. So the other thing that we're running up against is how many events there are in the world, how many events there are in North America. And it's just tough. It's just tough to compete against, every single other race it's in North America that's in your region.
Yeah, I think it's previously been and less so now because USA Cycling has lost a lot of events over the last few years.
Right.
But that saturation of events is tough, and especially when you start fighting, it kind of becomes which is worse, right? Because you start bleeding some membership, and you still got a lot of events. So now you start splitting the riders that are there between events that are overlapping. And so now both events suffer because all of a sudden they both have 30 guys in a race instead of having 60 guys at one. And so then it drives the event. And then one of the events collapses because it's like, well, I can't sustain it because I'm not getting eyeballs, so I don't get sponsors and I'm losing money. So then they go away, and so that's another event gone. And then more riders like, well, there's not events near me. So they're not, so the beginning Cat 5s and the locals aren't coming out because they're not willing to travel yet 200 miles to the next race. And so you kind of get this, it almost becomes a cyclical thing where it's kind of consuming itself, and to try to get that turned around is an interesting problem to solve, and so that can really hurt. That saturation, I think, is a big thing, and obviously you guys are pumping a lot of events, and
it's probably funny to hear me talk about saturation, especially as a representative of our company. Like, we are the king and queen of saturation in many ways. Some of that's by circumstance. So there's a lot of companies. Rev3 Triathlon was a company that was not going to be able to last much longer, and we come in and we can turn something. We can turn the ship a little bit. By acquiring a company like that. And they were great. Those guys are awesome. They create great events, experiences, but they were bumping up against the thing that everybody bumps up against, and that is, it wasn't called an Ironman. So that's what they needed. And now those events will turn the corner a little bit as we put a brand on it, for better or for worse. Again, I'm not trying to say that what we do is right. I'm just saying that this is what we observe. I will say communities, the cities are probably going to solve this problem before the companies do. So what we're seeing now and we're experiencing now is the cities are starting to muscle out events by cost. So what used to be very unaffordable situations in terms of how to get police and how to get fire departments involved with your event, now that costs you so much that it's so prohibitive. So I think in a way, I said a few years ago to a lot of my colleagues that it was about 5 years before we saw the bottom drop out from how many events are in communities, especially the big communities like Rochester, like Denver, like St. Louis, the bigger cities we're talking about, not the it's a good example, like Potsdam or like Canandaigua is not a good example. But you have these cities will make the decision for us as companies, and they'll say, this doesn't really fit our brand anymore. This doesn't really fit our community culture anymore. And it's just they're going to naturally push you out by price. They're not going to say it. they're not going to explicitly tell us, hey, we want you out. And sometimes maybe they will. I shouldn't say that. Sometimes they might say that. I've been in those conversations, but it's going to be very subtle as to how they do it, because they can't be shown as someone that makes, picks and chooses in the public sector, which is fine. But inevitably, I think the communities are the ones that's going to correct that problem. They're going to say, you know what, we just don't want this race anymore. So go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that, and there's kind of maybe two prongs to that. Is yes, they'll push it, they'll get pushed in some way, but there's other communities that welcome it because they see the ROI, and I think really showing return for events, not just, hey, I want to have an event to have people doing this thing, but really showing the community how that benefits them. And I think that'll fall on participants as well as, hey, when you go to these communities, buy lunch there, and spend money there. Don't just cheap out on it, because that's kind of that's what the sponsors are looking for. They're looking in the community, the cities, and so forth. And it really has to be the right size market. And it's you get into wanting to shut down roads and different things for these events. Too big a city, it gets swallowed up and it disappears. Even if you can afford it, nobody knows what's going on, so it gets no eyeballs. And the other end of the spectrum of, hey, you try to do something in Potsdam, nobody's coming because it's way out of the way and there's nobody there, and it's hard to get sponsors, so it's either participant supported or it goes away. But finding that right size market, and maybe just the markets will change as things happen, and a smaller community would be, not too small but not too big, welcomes it and says, hey, this is a great chance to get people to our community and to showcase who we are here. And that's really maybe a traditional type of platform for cycling too, is showcasing areas and using it for tourism and different things. And with all the helicopter or overhead shots and all the background and the stuff, when you watch the tour, you get all this history. Well, that's part of it, is generating tours, and people are like, wow, I want to go there, it looks awesome. Right. Yep. And so it'll push it into different markets, I think. So I don't know if I'd ring the death knell and say, hey, it's a matter of time before nobody wants events. Like, no, just different people will want events.
Exactly. Yep. No, that's a very good way of putting it. We call them racecations. If the city can turn them into a racecation, and an event can turn it into a racecation, the economic impact that comes with that, our average economic impact for an Ironman in North America is usually between $5 and $8 million for a community. That's numbers, but when you're only bringing in a regional customer to a Canandaigua, and they're driving from Rochester, and they're driving from Ithaca, and they're gonna buy lunch and go home, that's a tough sell unless Canandaigua says, we're all in on this, and we're gonna create a great experience. And that might be where USA Cycling gets really agile and gets really helpful, and they start to advocate in some of these communities and say, hey, this is an event in your community. Like, let's partner together. Let's make this a really cool event. Let's give it some national exposure. Let's get the eyes on it, and have some fun. It benefits them, benefits the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that's kind of the nut to crack, and I think there's there's going to be more changes at USA Cycling, and I'm sure there'll be more changes with everybody, and so it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But it's cool to hear your perspective from the triathlon world, because there's so many parallels there, and like I said, we see a lot of the same things happening at the same time, or in quick succession of what's happening inside, what's happening in your world. And I think there's been a little bit different flavor of triathlon being a little bit more like the gravel, but the gravel's picking it up, and I think
I'm definitely interested to see where Ironman goes with some of those. I think you can have a tremendous impact on a very open market, particularly with gravel. I think everybody who's involved with gravel right now is kind of going in different directions, and everybody's just sort of trying to figure out what is this, and what does it look like, and what does the bike look like, and how long are the events, and it'll be interesting to see if Ironman gets into that as well.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I'll keep you posted as we go along. So
very cool. Is there any place we can find you at, follow you on Instagram or anything along those lines, or any event you have working on right now?
Man. Oh, I wish I was that savvy and that popular. I don't really have that type of a following. I work specifically, like I mentioned to you guys, from Colorado to Canada. So if any of your listeners are in the area, they can feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to meet them. As a Rochester native, grew up in Fairport. Love talking with people from back home. I'm a big diehard Mets fan. If you want to strike a chord with me, let's talk about the New York Mets and how bad we are. That's always a way to find me, is commiserating with other Mets fans. But yeah, thank you guys for your time. I will say that you guys are keen on a lot of these topics. It's really impressive to hear athletes talk about these things, because that means that there's more athletes like you guys that are talking about it. And that's good and healthy for our sport. And you guys are tuned in. It sounds, just by the nature of your questions, it's impressive as to how much you guys are aware of. And I hope that there's more people listening to you guys because of that, because you clearly know what you're talking about.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, and we'll stay in touch.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right.